Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Children of Light podcast. Today it's going to be Ethan and I, and we're going to be covering the rest of Acts 12, picking up where Josiah left off. So it's going to be verses 6 all the way to 25. So I'm going to be going first. I'm going to be breaking down verses 6 through 19. So let's get right into it. Verse 6. On the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and guards in front of the door were watching over the prison. And behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell, and he struck Peter's side and woke him up, saying, "Get up quickly." And his chains fell off his hands, and the angel said to him, "Gird yourself and put on your sandals." And he did so. And he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me." And he went out and continued to follow, and he did not know what was being done, uh, that what was being done by the angel was real, but thought he was seeing a vision. When they had passed the first and second guard, they came to the iron gate that leads into the city, which opened for them by itself, and they went out and went along one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. When Peter came to himself, he said, "Now I know for sure that the Lord has sent forth his angel and rescued me from the hand of Herod and from all that the Jewish people were expecting." And when he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who was also called Mark, where many were gathered together and praying. And when he knocked at the door of the gate, a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer. When she recognized Peter's voice, because of her joy, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter was standing in front of the gate. They said to her, "You are out of your mind." But she kept insisting that it was so. They kept saying, "It is his angel." But Peter continued knocking, and when they had opened the door, they saw him and were amazed. But motioning to them with his hand to be silent, he described to them how the Lord had led him out of the prison. And he said, "Report these things to James and the brethren." Then he left and went to another place. Now when the day came, there was no small disturbance among the soldiers as to what could have become of Peter. When Herod had searched for him and had not found him, he examined the guards and ordered that they be led away to execution. Then he went down from Judea to Caesarea and was spending time there. So that was quite a bit there. We kind of left off on a cliffhanger last time. James's martyrdom, and then when Herod saw that it pleased the crowd, he took in Peter and was going to have him killed the next morning. And so, as we can see during this whole night, a lot of events happen here, and some pretty miraculous things. So, let's start breaking it down. Like I said here, verse 6, the very night when Herod was about to bring him forward. So we saw that Herod had brought him in, and now he was going to bring him forward right after this. So we got one night. So Peter's kind of struggling here in prison. He's like, "Okay, this is going to be the day that I die. I've got one night. Not much can happen. You're kind of screwed in that position." Um, and so we see, like Josiah mentioned before in his episode, a squad of soldiers was four soldiers. So there's two that are chained to him and two that are out in the door. And so when you have two people chained to you and then two right outside the door, you're not getting out. That's impossible. Especially the ones chained to you, you can't get off of that. You try and move, you've got two people against one, two outside that can come in and help. You're not escaping that by human means. Um, so we see here that this is probably the end of Peter. And that's what all the church is thinking, as we see later, that they're praying fervently for him. Um, but so, of course, then in verse 7, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell. And he struck Peter's side and woke him up, saying, "Get up quickly." On some things I want to note here is number one, angel appears in the cell, a light shines. That's going to wake you up. And so the fact that the guards were asleep and they weren't woken up by number one, the light shining, Number two, struck Peter's side, woke him up, get up quickly, and his chains fell off his hands. So his chains clatter off of him, probably falling to the floor and making quite a bit of noise. The angel is talking here, saying, "Get up quickly." And he's probably not whispering because the angel's not afraid of the guards. Um, so, I mean, that's a lot of noise, a lot of things going on. And you would think the guards are going to wake up or something like that. But as we can see, this is a supernatural sleep that they are in. God is in complete control over this situation. He knows what he's doing. Now, Peter, of course, doesn't really understand. We see that Peter was sleeping here, which is pretty interesting to me. The fact that he was sleeping on the night that he was going to die. If I knew I was going to die in the morning, I'm sure I would be up all night praying. I'd be worrying. But we see here the peace that God kind of bestowed on Peter. That the peace that Peter had in God's plan. He was like, even if this is my last night, oh well. So that doesn't matter to him. And so I think that's really, really amazing to see Peter's sleep there. But so now Peter being woken up, he's probably still a little groggy. He doesn't actually know exactly what's going on here. He thinks that he's having a vision, as we see in verse 9 at the end. He said, but he thought he was seeing a vision. So Peter, either he's just not fully awake yet, or he's like, oh, this is just impossible. I know I'm going to die tomorrow. God's just sending me a vision really quick. But Peter has no idea what's happening. He's just like, okay, I'm following your commands because that's what I do. I follow God's commands. So he just follows this angel out of the prison, walks past all the guards, walks through the gate, probably walks for a decent amount before finally the angel leaves him. We see there in verse 10 at the end said, so the gate opens for them. They went out in one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. And so at this point, Peter's like, oh, wait, here I am. Angel's gone. This is actually real. And so in verse 11, when Peter came to himself, he said, now I know for sure that the Lord has sent forth his angel. And so this quote here just shows that he realizes that God is in control of the situation. And I think it's amazing that his first thought was to just praise God. It was like, wow, now I know that God is in control here. Like, that's amazing. And of course, right after that, he's like, okay, now I should probably get out of here. Don't want to stand around in the middle of the street all night, or else the guards are going to come find me. And so he heads to the house of Mary, as we see in verse 12. And when he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who was also called Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying. Um, so we saw there in the last part of Josiah's section, verse 5, 12:5 says, so Peter was kept in prison, but prayer for him was being made fervently by the church to God. So people are gathered together, they're praying that Peter would be rescued. Um, and the reason that Peter probably went to the house of Mary was probably it was the closest thing to him. He just needs to get out, or he just knew that people were going to be gathered there. And so he needed to go there to the house of believers. But so he comes quickly to the door. He knocks, and the servant girl recognized her voice. So she didn't even open the door, didn't even look out to see who it was. She just heard his voice. Um, and I feel really bad for Peter here because he gets left outside waiting. She, in her excitement, which I don't blame her, I'd be pretty excited if the person that's chained to two guards outside the cell, is now miraculously knocking at the door. And so she runs back and she's like, "Guys, it's Peter. He's here." Um, and what I find really funny here is that they were in this house praying the whole time. This whole night, they've been praying for Peter's release. And now, when news of his release comes, they're like, "That no, that's not possible." I think it's really shows us that when we do pray for something, we need to make sure that we expect it to happen, or at least have faith that our prayer will be answered. Because if we pray and we don't believe that it's going to be answered, what's really the point in praying? You're just asking for a request that you don't think is going to happen. Um, but so we see here that they're like, oh no, that's not possible. It's probably his angel. As we saw there in verse 15, they kept saying it is his angel. This was a very popular belief that each person had a guardian angel, um, and that they could take the form of that person if they needed to. And so they think it's just his guardian angel that's outside the door, something like that, and they don't trust. But Peter's out here; he's still knocking. We see in verse 16, but Peter continued knocking. I'd be pretty scared too. Like the soldiers are probably, Herod's going to come looking for me. The soldiers are probably right on my tail. Please let me in. So he keeps knocking, and finally they come to the door, which I don't blame them for being scared too. When they hear knocking at the middle of the night, they just killed James. They have Peter in prison. Who do you think they're coming for next? They're coming for the church. The persecution is widespread, so they might think it's soldiers even. But so they get to the door, they open up, and they see it's Peter, and they're amazed, um, which is good. Um, Seeing a miracle of God, absolutely amazing. Um, but of course, Peter's like, "Hey, I don't have a lot of time. The morning's approaching. Herod's going to come looking for me." And so he motions them silent here in verse 17. But motioning to them with his hand to be silent, he described to them how the Lord had led him out of the prison. And he said, "Report these things to James and the brethren." Then he left and went to another place. And so he knows Herod's coming. The soldiers are going to come. They're going to look for me and they're going to try and get me back in prison. So I'm going to tell you here's what happened. Spread the word. The James talked about here is obviously not the one that was killed. This one is James, the brother of Jesus, that we see, the leader of the church, in fact. And so he wants them to tell the leaders of the church so that they can spread it like, hey, here's what God did for me. And then he leaves, rightfully so. He needs to get away from where Herod would look for him. And we see that this was very smart because in verse 18 and 19, we see Herod does come looking for him. Herod's not happy that he got out. I mean, there's four soldiers, two were chained to him. No possible way that he should be escaped. So Herod is beyond mad, calls in the soldiers when he can't find them, and kills them. Because according to Roman custom, if the, the guards let a prisoner escape during their watch on him, they would get the prisoner's crime, their punishment. And so, since Peter's punishment was death, that's what the guards got for letting him go. So they got executed. And then we see that Herod leaves, goes away from Judea to Caesarea and was spending time there. And that's where I'm going to transition it over to Ethan.
Thank you, Matthew. So now we're going to be moving into verses 20 through 25, the end of Acts 12 here. And I'll read that whole rest of the passage for you guys so you can hear the continuation from what Matthew was just talking, which actually, funny enough, is not really much of a continuation from what he was just talking about. So now it says, now he, Herod, was very angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and with one accord they came to him, and having won over Blastus, the king's chamberlain, they were asking for peace, because their country was fed by the king's country. On an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal apparel, took his seat on the rostrum and began delivering an address to them. The people kept crying out, "The voice of a God and not of a man." And immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died. But the word of the Lord continued to grow and to be multiplied. And Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had fulfilled their mission, taking along with them John, who was also called Mark. Excuse me. So, starting back in verse 20, we see, and Josiah did mention this in the last episode, is King Herod. This was King Herod Agrippa the first, and he was furious with the people of Tyre and Sidon. And the funny thing is we're not told why. There's it didn't have anything to do with Peter. When I was looking through this, I was looking at the context and some of the following through the Greek. It had nothing to do with Peter. And he was just furious with them for some unknown reason. It doesn't specify why. So he was angry with the people now, and with one accord, they came to him, and having won over Blastus, the king's chamberlain, they were asking for peace because their country was fed by the king's country. So these two cities, Tyre and Sidon, they were major port cities. They were dependent on their food supplies from Judea. So because of this, they needed to make peace with Herod. To achieve this, they had convinced Blastus, he was a high ranking official, likely in charge of the king's private affairs, to intercede on their behalf. So this verse gives a little bit into like the political and economic problems at this point in time, and they needed to work on negotiations and figure out things between these rulers, these difficult times here. So now, verse 21, on an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal apparel, took his seat on the rostrum and began delivering an address to them. So Herod, he arranged a public event. It was probably some sort of a festival in honor of the Roman emperor. Um, we see some historical records from Josephus confirm that this actually took place in Caesarea. Um, and he dressed, of course, Herod had to dress in this apparel, this grand outfit, to look nice, to look appealing, of course, to the people, because he was arrogant. He was an arrogant man, and kings often thought very highly of themselves, so they had to look good for their people. Um, he wanted to impress the audience. So the rostrum here refers to obviously a raised platform where he spoke. So kind of like today in a church, you think of a pulpit. It's kind of similar to what Herod would have been here, showing his power, of course, to them. Verse 22 here, the people kept crying out, the voice of a god and not a man. Well, obviously, that's absolutely heretical. He was not a god. As Herod spoke, the crowd began to flatter him by calling him a god and not a man, calling him basically, they were calling him divine. Um, Obviously, we see in ancient world and ancient Old Testament, even kings were sometimes treated and viewed as gods. They were bowed down to, they were worshipped, especially here under Roman influence. The people of Tyre and Sidon, needing his favor, may have exaggerated their praise to please him. And as we see, uh, Herod, rather than rejecting their worship as blasphemous, he accepted it because he was arrogant and he loved it. Verse 23 shows us, and immediately an angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give God the glory, and he was eaten by worms and died. So obviously, here we see Herod's failure to acknowledge who God actually was and rejecting the people's praise of him as a God. This angel, he struck him down. It wasn't immediate. Another thing of Josephus records, again, those are not inspired. Those are just historical records that Herod actually suffered severe abdominal pains and died 5 days later. Obviously that says here he was eaten by worms and died. So that obviously that sounds horrifically gruesome and really disgusting, honestly. And in a funny thing, it kind of echoes us back to a past biblical judgment, Daniel 4 and Nebuchadnezzar, his humbling of uh, basically eating the grass and being a cow for a time. So God had a swift response to Herod's arrogance, to steal his glory, because you do not steal God's glory from him. For you to be that arrogant and high on your rostrum as he was here, God's not going to appreciate that very much, and he will humble you. So, verse 24, we see, but the word of the Lord continued to grow and to be multiplied. We've seen this in previous episodes that we've discussed. Nothing was going to stop the word of God from being pushed to the ends of the earth. Nothing was. So, despite Herod's opposition to the church, as we saw with Josiah's episode, James's death didn't hinder God's plan. Herod's death didn't hinder anything. Instead, the gospel spread even more. Paul was persecuted, as we're going to see in the coming chapters. Peter has been persecuted now. We're going to see these things throughout Acts. Persecution, oftentimes, and most of the time, it leads to greater growth in the church. It shows God's sovereignty and that his plans prevail over ours. God's plans are greater and his will is more powerful. And then the final verse here, we get back into seeing Paul, and Barnabas. And Barnabas and Saul return from Jerusalem when they had fulfilled their mission, taking along with them John, who is also called Mark. So Barnabas and Saul, again, as I just stated, also Paul, he did not have his name changed. That was just a Greek and a Gentile way. Had been in Jerusalem delivering financial aid. We saw that in Acts 11. After completing their mission, they returned to Antioch, bringing John Mark, and this was, in fact, the same Mark who wrote the Gospel of Mark. This was John Mark here. And this verse basically transitioned us now to the shift in Acts of going from Peter to Paul now. Chapter 13 it shows Paul's first missionary journey, and we're going to look at that next time. And it shows that the church was just growing beyond Jerusalem and expanding now into the Gentile world, because Peter was to the Jews, Paul was to the Gentiles. So with that, I'm going to invite Matthew to close us out.
Perfect. Thank you, Ethan. So yeah, like you said, Acts is now going to take a shift. We've seen a lot of Peter's ministry, the start of the church. Now we're going to kind of see how the church expands through the ministry of Paul. So look forward to that in the coming episodes. So thank you guys for listening in and have a blessed day.